Okay, cool. Welcome to round 2 of the UKM Debate Open. On proposition, we have the ORSAS 1, and negative, we have Mara F. Without much further ado, on the motion about abandoning the label of feminists in the developing world, we now call upon the Honourable Prime Minister.
ORSAS 1 is Tika.
Yeah.
Oh no, you just said opposition.
Oh, I said prop. But
Prop. Being a woman is actually so hard in current world. You know why? Because they are always opposed by some of the majority in a sort of gender and other things, which is being a viral in today's society. So, why women in the developing world should have the rights to label as feminists in fighting for their social awareness and causes related to women's issue. Firstly, let me to explain the ideology of feminism. In ideology, social theory or political movements such as led by Emma Watson, Michelle Obama in current world, which argues that legal and social restriction on women must be removed in order to bring about equality of both sexes in all aspects of public and private life. That is what is actually about feminism in current world. And I think when we talk about feminism, always people it's always go for the female sector. It's not a thing that actually going for both sexes. It's actually more to female. It's wrong. It's actually upholding the rights of both sexes. And then even why being feminist is the apt medium for women to propose or fighting for social awareness and causes related to women's issues. That's my first point in today's debate. Why? Because, for example, in Pakistan, where Taliban terrorist group have overruled the nation to stop girls to go for school, in that scenario, Malala is just a schoolgirl and not supported by anyone at that stage. When she shot down by the Taliban and still able to recover her state of living, then she find a way to uphold the rights that is feminism. Although she didn't tagging herself as a feminist, but feminist is all about upholding the equality of both sexes in all aspects, right? In today's debate, we are talking about self-awareness and causes that are related. So it is relatable, although she didn't tag herself as a feminist. So I think it makes sense, right? So secondly, the coercion of people in believing that being a feminist is something not right and it is wrong is most probably proposed by people who against the rights of their opponent gender in succeeding in all fields, such as our opponent's theory. Yes.
Can you tell me, in a world where you're trying to break gender norms and patriarchal structures, what label would you call yourself in order for you to forward these values?
It's actually in breakdown social norms and all those things is actually on certain individuals who misconcept or they conclude a thing in such aspect and they don't really understand what is actually tagging a people can bring to a harm. Like tagging a people as a feminist is actually showing that they are doing something to uphold their rights. They create a social awareness. So that is why we will allow women to tag as a feminist in current world. And then even in Islam, where it is a religion that strongly believes that both sexes in their religion is already given equal rights since the existence of Prophet Muhammad. But what happened in France recently is when the citizen banned or forcing the Muslims women to take off their niqab or hijab, which is fully covered, right? So when they started to take action on this issue, they don't have any medium to access to the community to tell them that wearing a hijab is actually a moderate way in Islam to tell the people that the woman's supposed to be in this way to closer to the God, and they are practicing it as a cultural belief. So to access to the citizens, they don't have any way. So they choose feminism, but they don't tag it as a feminism. But feminism is actually all about they upholding their rights, right? So what's happening in France is an apt medium to show us that feminism is not something wrong. Yes, ma'am.
I'm confused. So do you want people to claim the label of feminist, or do you want them to abandon the label of feminist? Because your argument is convoluted at this point.
Actually, we are proposing to abandon is like we are give away the rule to them, right? To tag themselves as a feminist. So it's like we are telling that give away this thing to a feminist is actually going to create a very good way to give equal rights and also to aware people on social things that happen in current world. So that is why we are talking about. And most probably, if this case is going to end with the opposition, what is going to happen is that is the nation will be a stereotype people, and also they will more to gender barriers, which they will uphold to certain norms which is not related to social awareness, and also they don't even come up for uphold this kind of issue which is being overruled by some of the majority in current world. So from that, I rest my case. Thank you.
I thank the Prime Minister for his speech, and I'll call upon the Leader of Opposition to open the case of the opposition.
Ladies and gentlemen, we understand that the fight for women against the oppression and inspiration that these women are receiving in society is something that's very detrimental towards them, right? We understand that a lot of these social issues are being fought for in developed worlds, but we think that within these developed worlds, the impact and the benefits that they get towards those of the developing world won't be reached, right? Because of the different social structures that you have within these developing worlds. We think that when you fight for social issues and issues that cater specifically towards women, it's a lot beneficial for them within these developing worlds. And the label of being a feminist is exceptionally important for these women within these certain circumstances, right? What am I going to talk to you for today? Right? I'm going to talk about two things. First of all, on how exactly these feminists are perceived within these developing worlds, and secondly, why when you abandon this sort of label, it's harder to fight for these social issues that are catered to women specifically, right? But before I move on, let's talk to you on government's really weird case for today, right? Because they were okay with the fact of some people like having the label of being a feminist, but also okay with people who don't want to identify themselves as feminists, right? And they say that under this side, it's a lot easier for you to not identify yourself as a feminist because you're able to push or fight for these social issues a lot stronger and a lot better on their side, right? We think that it's the government's burden for you for today, right? To completely reject the idea of label and telling us why that label is specifically harmful towards the fight of a woman, especially towards the social issues and the oppression that these women are receiving in these societies, right? under the whole case, the only thing that they wanted to talk to you about was that the actions of a woman is enough to change the social issues within these specific countries or within the developing world, right? We think that the action of a woman just by wearing a hijab or trying to talk about social issues that these women are receiving, right? Like being oppressed or whatever, and not getting the like equal wage gap within these specific cases, right? We think that these kind of issues won't be pushed for and won't be fight for, or won't even be understood by majority of society because of how that social structure within that society is, right? Of how they have this strong cultural beliefs from before that women could not advance further than where they are, or further than being in the kitchen and making a sandwich with the husband, right? We think that when you have, we think that when you say that the actions of a woman is enough to change social issues, so people aren't actually aware of the social issues that are within these specific developing countries and within these specific developing world, right? But I'll explain more on that within my presentation, right? So what exactly do you think is the world that we live in today, right? We think that within the developing world, these women or these people who identify themselves are feminists or people who are usually educated, right? Meaning that these people are able to access the type of education that exposes them to the issues and to the fights that these women are currently experiencing, right? But secondly, we think that when these women label themselves as feminists, what happens is that this means that these women would actually want to create changes within the social structures within the developing world, right? Meaning that whatever they do themselves, once they label themselves as feminists, like encroaches onto the other women in the societies, telling them that I, as myself, as a feminist, are here to fight for your causes, are here to fight for the oppression and fight for the difficulties that you have within life and the life that you want to perceive, the life that you want to go for within that specific country, right? So let's talk to you on the challenges of women and challenges of women within these developing countries, right? We think that women within these developing countries have lots of oppositions and lots of criticism, right? Meaning that because of this criticism, because of this opposition that they get, right? We think that the expectations that people hold on to them is for them to behave within this specific society, right? Meaning that when you have this sort of when you expect them to behave in a certain way, it makes it very difficult for these women to raise awareness within these specific societies because of the fact that you have a majority of society who does not agree with what you are doing, right? This becomes even more detrimental when you get rid of the label of being a feminist, right? Because the label of being a feminist actually shows the strength of the label itself helps people to identify and show to a larger group of society that there is actually an existing problem within the developing world or within the world as it is, and this problem is specifically detrimental towards women itself, right? So let's talk to you on how feminists are perceived in this way, right? We think that there are two perceptions towards these feminists. First of all, on how feminists are dirty, man-hating, and disgusting. But secondly, on a more lenient or a better way that these women are perceived is that feminism itself is evolving to account for the different experiences that these women are experiencing, right? Let's talk about the first issue, which is on how the perception of feminists to be dirty, man-hating, and disgusting, right? We think that the problem is not with the label, but with the outcome that you want to achieve, that you want, and how society perceives you in trying to fight for those outcomes, right? We think that when this happens, we think that this fight becomes harder because of the society that we live in, whereby they're entrenched with cultural belief that women just should stay where they are and should not progress further within society, right? We think that with the label, you now believe in an idea beyond culture, meaning that as a woman, you can still expand yourself and get rid of and get out of the culture, the cultural oppression that you're getting just because of that, right? And when this happens, this means that women are now able to live the life that they want and set themselves apart from the existing society or from the existing bad narrative that they get from society in those cases, right? We think that feminists within these developing countries are usually a numerical minority, right? Meaning that when you identify yourself as a feminist, you receive lots of criticism. And this makes it difficult for any other women to want to come out, right? Because you're constantly getting criticized and constantly getting hated just because you want to fight for the things that are oppressing you and that you feel deeply for, right? We think that when there's an image of someone who is fighting for you, you now are able to at least want to try and come out and try and fight for the experiences that you get with the experiences that you're getting, the oppression that you're getting, and you're trying to get your voice heard and tell people about this type of oppression, right? and this is not only just about a fight for women, right? It's also a fight for men, where within society, men cannot be perceived as being weak or being feminine or whatever, right? We think that when you push for this type of narrative and push for the rights of women, this also changes the narrative and the perception that we have towards men, meaning that men don't necessarily have to be masculine in these cases. Men can also be in cases where people who have sort of feminine side and want to help out, and just want to live out their life just because they can, right? In the end, we think that the fight for feminism is something that is very important within this developing world, but we think that the strength of that label is extremely important to want to push for that fight and want to cater to the oppression and the bad narrative that you get within these existing societies. Right? We think that all women should come out and fight, and the label itself helps.
Yeah. I think the leader of Vox, and now invite the Deputy Prime Minister.
Okay.
Behind every success man, there's a great woman who stood behind that. Let's say it's a single mother who fight for her right, for her kids' right. And are we going to call her as a feminist? Because what she did is just fight for her right. Is it fair enough to call her as a feminist? Because only what she did is a job as a mother. Why can't we call this feminist community as a woman instead of we are labeling them as a feminist? The opposition bench did mention about it is important to call them as a feminist, but I don't think there is a problem if we just change the name of the feminist to a woman, because all women know that they are fighting for something. Is it fair enough if I fight for my right? Are you going to call me as a feminist? I will just stand up for my right. Am I a feminist? Because if you go to the outside of the world, if you walk on the street, if you ask a woman, are you a feminist? They will directly say that no, I am not a feminist. I am just a woman. But in their daily life, they are fighting for something. They are fighting for their right. We all wake up in the morning and fight for something. This is why we shouldn't label someone as a feminist, as you shouldn't label a guy who falls in love with a guy as a gay. Because let's say if you keep on labeling a guy who falls in love with a guy, if you keep on labeling a guy who falls in love with a guy as a gay, they won't even come up from a cupboard, because people are going to call that as a gay, not a guy, not a normal guy, not a normal boy. This will directly disturb their daily life. We don't want this thing happen. Okay. First of all, why we should ban away the level of feminine in fighting for social awareness? Because why? First, we need to put away the stereotype thinking about what feminists did, because they are just feminists. They are not. We don't want people to think that they are an antagonist, protagonist. We don't want people to know them as a people who did a bad job, because all that she did, this community did, is fighting for their own right. Like I said just now, are you going to call a single mom who fight for their kids' right as a feminist? It is unfair to call them as that, because they didn't even do any harm. Because you said just the opposition bench did mention that there is nothing wrong with the feminists, and then if there is nothing wrong, you said, but we do know that if you know that, yes.
I was raised by a single mother who believes in these values as well. Why is it such a bad thing or such a petty thing for me to call her as a feminist and a woman at the same time?
Okay, because we need to know that not all women are feminists, but feminists are a woman. We don't want to know them as a feminist. Why don't we just call them as a woman instead of calling them as a feminist? Is it fair? It is more not a feminist. I didn't call myself a feminist. I am a lady who fight for myself every day, every single day, every single minute that I walk away in this world. Because this is, we want to reject this label, because once you label someone as a label, their own label, there will be a gap between the community, because you are knowing them as this name, not as a person. We don't want that to happen in this world. And then back to my point, why we should put away this stereotype thinking, because we don't want people to understand what are they fighting for actually. If a mother is fighting for their own right, if their mother are fighting for their own right, why didn't you just know that as a single mother instead of calling them as a feminist mother? We don't want that name to be. Is it let's say the kids are going to the school and the friends are saying your mom's a feminist. We don't want to be friends with you because your mom are doing something. Because not all people understand what is real meaning of the feminist. They are actually fighting for their own right. It is fair enough for you just to know them as a woman instead of labeling them with a name, with some name. And then, what are we fighting? What these women are fighting for actually? What are these women in this world are fighting for? They are fighting for equality among women and men, such as Malala Yousafzai are fighting for education in women's rights. Why? Because she believes that all women should have the same level of education between men and women. Not all women shouldn't just stay in the kitchen and cook for her husband. Women should have the same equal level of education in this world, because she believes that with education it will somehow empower themselves in the future. Because she believes that if a woman are given the same right with a guy in a level of education, they will be looked up as a woman instead of just a woman who cook in the kitchen. We don't want this thing. If you call, let's say if I call Malala Yousafzai as a feminist, am I going to go and support her? No, because I don't really understand what is a feminist. But if you just know Malala Yousafzai as a woman who fight an education system, education level for among women and men, we will somehow support her. We will somehow give a hand for her to just yes, let's do this. We are women. We are sisters in the world. We are going to help you. Let's say not all women in Islam really understand, are willing to join feminists, because in Islam somehow there is no feminism in Islam, because all women in Islam are actually being treated the same way. But Malala Yousafzai, what she did is just she wanted to empower more women's rights. Let's say in Arabic world, there are somehow a problem about women are not being allowed to vote in give a vote in for the country, because they think that women's vote are nothing, and they didn't even allow a woman to have a driving license, because she believed that women shouldn't drive. Why is this happening in this world? Because we want you to know that either you are a man or woman, you should just allow women to have a driving license. It's for their own safety. Why are we? Because we want these people to protect this right. And then I don't think that. Thank you.
I thank the Deputy Prime Minister. I now call upon the Deputy Leader of the Opposition.
Chair, I am a woman, a Malay, a Muslim, a liberal individual, and all these labels shape the way in which I interact with the rest of the world, in how I view policies and the decisions that I make, and the way in which I interact with communities that may have different views, and it also impacts the way in which the rest of the world views me. Because I think at the point at which I can claim power over a label in which I identify myself in order to push for positive rights to the rest of communities, I think it sparks discussion. I think it inspires other individuals to acknowledge the lack of equality that often besiege women as well as certain men in developing world, ladies and gentlemen. And I think it is shameful for a proposition to assume that this debate was a forceful imposition on the label of feminists or on the entirety of the female community. What we would say is that it's a discussion about the obligation of this one individual to the way in which she chooses to identify herself and what are the ramifications of that label, ladies and gentlemen. But let's assess this debate, right? I'm going to be talking about two things. One why is a label so important in this particular discussion? Two, what are the obligations of this specific individual and why we think she better deals with the deconstruction of social issues? All my rebuttals will be integrated. But let's assess this woman, right? I think at a lot of times, the nuance that was given by a proposition in this debate is that you must be an individual who chooses one label over another. So they say it's mutually exclusive. But I don't think that's true. A lot of the times, what people often miss is that even though you are a woman, calling yourself a feminist, that doesn't mean an individual who doesn't participate in that gender can't call themselves a feminist as well. But it's also about you as an individual believing a specific set of values to the equality of individuals in terms of being able to access political opportunities, social mobility, and economic opportunities as well. The characterization that was provided by the leader of opposition, not responded to by the Deputy Prime Minister, is that oftentimes in the developing world, if an individual is choosing to identify as a feminist, or if an individual understands the concept and the values in which feminists fight for, that this is an individual that has received a little bit more of a privilege relative to the rest of the community because she was given the awareness and the ability to understand what these values are. Because a lot of the times, the structural oppression that women in the developing countries face is that cultures, religion, and tradition often dictates the way in which you think about things, the way in which you believe in things, and often women are held in thought prisons to necessarily challenging certain ideals, whether or not you can necessarily claim ownership over your identity or your sexual rights, whether or not you can be an authority within your family, or you always have to seek control to your husband, ladies and gentlemen. So why is the label so important? We think that as an individual, it's an identifier, one that makes you visible, one that places you in a position where you are able to tell individuals that I am a person who believes in a specific set of values, that I believe in social justice issues, that I believe in equality. The problem with social justice issues in a lot of these countries is that it is ambiguous in nature at the point where you don't put a label on it, ladies and gentlemen. And a lot of the times it becomes very difficult for you to call out or challenge problematic structures. Like for example, if an individual is homosexual and wants to marry their partner, a lot of the times cultural and religious nuances are often utilized as a means to oppress the rights of these individuals, right? And often when people want to challenge these structures, it becomes very difficult because you want to argue that I believe in these rights, but at the same time there's the internal conflict to your cultural beliefs and your religious beliefs that often makes it difficult for you to challenge these ideals. What you do as a feminist is that you come forward and say that I, as a human, believe the capacity of human beings to engage in equality irrespective of my culture and my tradition, ladies and gentlemen. We think that this better sparks discussion to tell individuals that perhaps as a human, your consideration should be equality, barring your cultural and religious nonsensical traditions that may necessarily limit the way in which you think, ladies and gentlemen. But secondly, what are the obligations of this woman, right? And I would say that in a world where Malala Yousafzai receives so much critical acclaim to her causes in education, that we would want for her to claim herself to be a feminist, right? To show to the rest of the world that there's severity in this label to inculcate specific kinds of reaction. Because oftentimes people can just brush it away and say, yeah, we're doing enough to deal with education because we've given an award to this person, we've sent her off to Oxford, without ever acknowledging perhaps there's still structural oppression that plagues the women in Middle East, ladies and gentlemen. We think at the point where you claim this label, you're able to continue to fight and pay homage and respect and honor to the first and second wave of feminists that seek the rights that you currently enjoy in status quo. The ability to choose your identity, the ability to access sexual and reproductive rights, the ability to vote, are all things that are given to you by the capacity of individuals who call themselves feminists in the past, ladies and gentlemen, and we have a duty to forward that cause. Thirdly, why do we deal with social issues so much better? The problem in the developing world is that the prerequisite to break gender expectation is the existence and the acknowledgement that issues are gendered to begin with. And the problem in that is that in the developing world, a lot of the times people brush away these problems as perceived like annoyance or things that are inherently things that you should be expecting as an individual in that particular community. For example, laws and legislation in Malaysia are coded in gendered languages that often grant protection to one community and not the other. For example, in the Penal Code of Malaysia, a lot of the laws with respect to provocation applies characteristics that are attached to gender. That you need to be instantaneously provoked, that it must be grave and sudden, that you must feel that you must be hot-tempered in order for you to be able to utilize the defense of provocation. What this does is that individuals who react or people who suffer from battered women syndrome after continuous cycles of abuse, who murder their husband while she's asleep, can't claim the same kind of provocation because we don't account for the different degrees of provocation that a woman necessarily face, right? And a lot of the time, the discussion is limited in accounting for specific gender binaries to how individuals are supposed to behave, ladies and gentlemen, that a man must be authoritative, that a woman must be meek and submit and seek to her husband. Why do you think this is necessarily important? Because it allows for people to put a name to the concept, especially when you want to come forward and challenge cultural and religious norms, as opposed to just coming forward and saying, I want to be a human being, I believe in certain values. I don't think in a world where political discussions are so polarized, or there's so many issues ongoing in the world, that you'll be able to place yourself in a position where you're of relevance, or when people care enough about the issues that you want to talk about. What are the impacts? I think one, and Ash told you, the impacts in which other women perceive these values, and it gives them courage to be able to identify and claim these labels as something with honor, as opposed to something they should be ashamed about.
Yeah.
But secondly, when it comes to gender fight, it's about sustainability. You have to ensure that the future generations also want to fight for the same issues, and a lot of times we don't want them to disassociate themselves from social issues on presumption that we only want to hate men and nothing else. And I think at the point where a person comes forward and labels himself as a feminist, you also have to explain to everyone else what this essentially means, and this gives you the ability to impact everyone else, unlike any other means in status quo, ladies and gentlemen. I think this is the only way in which an individual can successfully navigate and maneuver a world in which culture and religious expectations tell you to behave, think, and say things in the specific ways that they want.
Yeah.
I thank the Deputy Leader of Opposition. I now welcome the Government Whip to sum up the substantive portion of the government speech.
Well, do you still remember the floor? Well, yeah, I'm going to start with my rebuttals on the opposition side. Well, let me first start on my rebuttal. They came up with points that if they are not going to stop labeling the feminists to the society, what is going to happen? This is going to have easy access. It is going to make it things even more easier for actually the future generations to actually see what is actually going on if the society are going to label them as feminists. Well, let me first emphasize this, that actually by labeling them as a feminist, it's actually making things even more complicated, and it makes things even more hard to access actually. For example, there's an example gave from the government side. If for example, if a single mother is actually coming out from a cause of fighting for their own kids, okay, and you actually keep labeling them as a feminist, okay, and when the society keep looking at you and like, oh, is that labeling that actually makes it even more intriguing feeling to actually for a single mother to fight for their rights, because they feel obligated. But actually, why are they keep looking at me that way? Why are they keep seeing me as feminism? But in that way, I'm just actually fighting for my rights.
Alright, Minister. Actually, when they even the opposition talk about the younger generations, they actually have a positive view on the way of a person is actually calling us a feminism and management. Well, management, Mr. Speaker, sir. Well, what is it actually? If you are actually stopping the way of labeling them, that would actually decrease the problem, and rather than you keep labeling them as a feminism, okay, you could actually tell the society what is actually the problem which is happening, rather than you keep labeling them as a feminist as a feminist.
Point. It is true that a single mother or Malala can choose to not label themselves as a feminist. But your obligation this big is to talk about this individual and why this person should abandon that label.
Yeah, they should abandon this because it's actually creating even more stereotype worse on actually when they're actually called as a feminist. Okay, you're actually creating even more stereotype. You could actually just yes, you could just not say you're a feminist. Why must you actually emphasize yourself as a feminist, which actually creates so even more conflicts between the younger generations or the future generations? Well, let me support on my government's point when it comes to yes, by actually abandoning the word feminist, it is also come up to points on the on my prime minister point. What tagging a person? Yes, how is it actually good, really good, nice thing that a person is being tagging when actually they're standing for their rights in a society, even it's a minority society where they're standing. Why is it a must for them to actually label themselves? Okay, and I guess labeling is actually creates a big gap between the normal society and the people who are actually fighting for it, right? And it comes to in Islamic way, okay, when it comes to Islamic way, Islamic doesn't have anything to do with feminism, okay, because they already believe that everything is already in equal rights. And when it comes to an Islamic woman, when she actually fight for herself for education, so she didn't label herself as a feminist, right? She doesn't have to label herself a feminist, but what she's doing is she's just standing for rights about education. Right, so it's not actually a must to label yourself as a feminist in order for you to move in a right way or stand for your own rights. Okay, you can just do it even without labeling. And by labeling, it actually creates some of consequences that actually people seem even more harder to connect to the society what you actually want to say to the outside world. Right, so with this, I actually feel that I'm asking my case, and as a woman in this developing country, I guess the word it is not really supposed to actually label them as a feminist, and and with this I would rest my case.
I think the government whip, I now call upon the opposition.
Every debate about feminism must start with respecting and understanding what the title of feminism actually means. what it really means to respect the woman who claims to be a feminist, regardless of the kind of background she comes from or the kind of specific fight she's actually fighting on, right? We believe that feminism is any woman or even sometimes men who fight for rights, who fight for the equality, especially when they're on the short side of the stick, right? So for all these reasons, we believe that feminism is not a label that is inherently bad, and they never prove to us why. So that's not one to like my issue, right? First and foremost, whether or not we actually need this label and how integral it is to the movement itself, right? So regarding they're talking about how we should abandon this narrative, we should abandon the feminist label because it creates these stereotypes of what a feminism is. They never told her exactly what are the bad stereotypes regarding feminism. But we believe this. Feminism actually creates this more narrative of an empowered woman or a strong, independent woman who stands up against these unequal rights that have been pushed onto her. So the thing about this argument, right, is it never talks about the stereotypes like this on their side, right? When you call a woman, when you call somebody a woman in Pakistan, what does that mean? Maybe a wife, a cleaner, a chef, somebody who's objectified, somebody who's just to make the next generation just to churn out babies. These are the kind of narratives that's on their side, that the feminist label is exactly what these women need in order to empower themselves. People think that this woman has something to say and she will actually do things to prove herself. When you talk about Islam and feminism, shame on you for saying that Islam is a religion that does not count for feminism. Especially when Islam was a religion that stopped the killing of daughters and babies and empower women like Aisha radiallahu anhu to actually educate other people and give women this position, right? But even in a world where religion defends feminism, we still need this label because in execution, because still in execution, people will still like manipulate this thing and use a label to fight against this manipulation, to fight against these misinterpretations of what feminism or what women's rights actually are. So when I'm not using a label, well, they talk about how the only reason they said you don't need a label is because people like Malala, for example, can fight without labels. But even so, Malala is still labeled as a feminist by the most of society, right? In our world, we can use people like her to add meaning and power to our cause. When you can label what are feminist values, that and what is not feminist values, it actually creates discussion. It creates a check and balance with what feminism actually is. And even if I had came up and said that he will create a conflicting narrative like how Emma Watson was denounced for being a feminist because she had this he for she movement and they didn't want to include men in it. At least that we can see that it could have been harmful, but it didn't because we had counterbalances where people were discussing like men do play an integral part in the feminism movement, and that creates the discussion and it creates the social traction that we need to actually have this movement to move on. So even even in that case, right, the most persuasive and the most merit that the social traction deserves to move forward and only under the feminist label. In fact, in world without that label, right, Malala would be just an individual Muslim oppressed by the hijab that she wears, which society views as disempowering. Only the feminist label helps people, especially white people, like, to see past that, to identify her as a feminist as opposed to solely an oppressed Muslim who wears the hijab. So another reason, they also thought they need to remove the label because they don't want people to look bad because they're feminism. But we already told you like what the woman narratives carry, what the single mom narratives carry, that you can't manage a household, that you're a bad wife and things like that. These are the things they want to remove, right? So a lot of people are proud to carry. In fact, a lot of people are very proud to carry the feminist title because it is so bad, right? The movement will not have been as much traction as it has been now. From that label, you're known as somebody who is strong, somebody who stands up for your rights, somebody who is worth listening to. We already told you that the power that comes from the label and how it's perceived, how the problem is not within the label, but even if the problems exist, right, it's not because of the label, but because of how people actually interpret it, and only with the label can have discussion on it, right? We told you how in their world, without a label, you have nothing to latch on to, no specific set of values to fall back on to make sure that you're going in the right direction to empower your cause perfectly. We already told you that abandoning the label makes it harder for you to fight with these issues because the label empowers you. Being a Muslim empowers you in the sense of Islam. Being an invader, being a capitalist, these things empower you to have an actual stance that you can stand for. You can utilize this for maintaining norms specific for your cause. In fact, social justice takes a really, really long time. You need to inspire generations to come. You need to inspire women, you need to inspire men. And the way you can keep this inspiration going is by having a story, a narrative, a label that you can put onto this to hand down from generations to come. So in their world, their own obligation to the second issue is like why women have obligation to this level, to this cause. They say that women shouldn't have the obligation because it's bad and everything, but they never really give nuances to it, right? We told you why women have obligation to defend it is because most cases these are women who have gone through who have had an education, but also who have gone through the kind of obstacles that most are the reason that these people fight for feminism in the first place. So when they can attach themselves to the movement, especially in a movement that has removed themselves from those obstacles, they have to pay for it, right? In a world where you're just a woman or just a single woman, and we refuse to collectively fight in the label of feminism or social mobility, you don't get the kind of support, the social mobility, the political capital that previous feminist generations have. Benefits that you now currently enjoy and will lose the moment you don't play your part in keeping up the success of the feminist movement. So the last issue is why we deal with social issues better. We already told you that gender bias exists everywhere, right? That most of these social issues are gender biased to begin with. There's gender bias in laws, like issues, and when most issues are gendered, we require a gendered concept to fight against that. We need discussion and the label is exactly what it is. The label requires discussion and explanation. So in a world where you don't claim to be a feminist, people will see that these issues are gendered to begin with. Not until, like, for example, Steph White claims to be a feminist and pushes for that woman quota in Oslo. Even progressive people in the debating community wouldn't really care about whether or not women get a chance and to debate fairly, whether they have to lower their voices to sound more compelling. They never answered what is the inherent harm of feminist label to the movement. They must debunk all the reasons that we've proven that feminist label is important and why they're saying that to be worth it. We've already told you how integral and effective the feminist label is in fighting for the awareness of women's issues, and for all those reasons we're proud to propose.
I thank the op-wit. Now I invite the op-reply.
In the early 1900s, calling yourself a suffragette not only risks your life, it also risks your ability to maintain your occupation. It also risks your ability to maintain your marriage. It also risks your ability to maintain custodianship over your children. These are the egregious harms that individuals in the early 1900s faced at the point where they chose to call themselves suffragettes and fight for the right to vote. Acknowledging all of these harms, they still chose to label themselves that way because they acknowledge the repercussions and the power of labeling themselves and the impact it has to communities. And I think that in the 21st century, the ability for a woman that received the privilege of understanding equality and feminism to label herself as a feminist when wanting to fight for social issues. Because this is a person that is consciously aware enough of the social issues that plague the communities in the developing world, wants to fight for those issues, but needs to be able to maintain a label that visibly identifies herself in that community. Ladies and gentlemen, what was the burden proposition in this round? They needed to tell us why no label or why this specific label will never lead to any constructive outcomes. We told in opposition that labeling yourself is important because you need to embrace and you need to ensure that you're dealing with specific languages and how you participate in a discussion for equality. Several issues in this debate. One, what was the obligation of this movement? We told you time and time again that as an individual that is socially conscious and aware of the social justice issues that plague communities and are privileged enough to receive the concept of feminism or the light of feminism into their lives, that you have an obligation to ensure that you pass on this information to the rest of society in a way that's constructive and positive, not an imposition from the outside world, but rather an internal change when an individual from that community understands this concept and forwards his value as an individual. They say that label is bad for many reasons. One, because there are stereotypes and it pegs you into specific behavior. But we told you that stereotypes exist anyway. And feminism and the label of feminist is utilized to break the concept of stereotypes. That you can be a strong and powerful woman in the way which you challenge social norms. That you can be a Muslim and still want to challenge patriarchal structures that dictate specific kinds of behavior that's problematic. They also told you it overpowers other identities. But no analysis to show why a person can't claim to be a woman, a Muslim, and a feminist at the same time, or a human and a feminist at the same time, right? And we told you that these identities correlate because in order for you to be a feminist, you have to understand and appreciate human values, everything that's essentially important. Why do we think it's important for you to then label? We see that you become a visible identifier, one that sparks discourse, one that helps people who are currently on the fence and are unable to put a name to the feelings that they currently face when trying
trying to challenge certain structures. Growing up, I found it difficult to reconcile the fact that I do believe in God, but I also believe in the rights for individuals who are perhaps homosexual to attain the same kinds of rights that heterosexuals currently do. And I was able to get that power at the point where I found feminism and understood that equality must belie any other identities that individuals have in status quo. We think that at the point where you label yourself as a feminist, it puts an impetus to a lot of discussions regarding gender to be viewed from the lens of a gendered discussion, ladies and gentlemen. And that's essentially important because we told you that it impacts not only other women who may not necessarily be able to claim the same kinds of power that you are, but it also impacts the generations of individuals that are looking forward to ensure a sustainable fight. Individuals who may want to disassociate themselves from the fight because they assume it's just a man-hating cause rather than viewing it as a constructive discussion about equality, and you as an individual coming forward and saying, I am a feminist, I don't hate men, I hate structures that necessarily differentiate men and women, and that's a discussion that you can create. And I think that this allows for you to engage in a fight against structures that's sustainable, that gets actual rewards, rather than you just expecting altruism from the rest of the community because you perceive yourself to not have a moral obligation. As an individual, you got the education that showed you feminism because women voted for better schools. And those women got those rights to vote from women who fought for the right to vote. And I think that's a generational obligation as an individual that you must take up.
Yeah.
Short reply.
Let's put it in a spectrum. Why tagging a person as a feminist is going to enhance the movement of a woman to improve their ability to connect with the society or the citizen, to improve the or uphold the social awareness and also their rights in current society. Let's talk about the case where she had told us that even in villages, they banning a woman who uphold to her rights to tag herself as a feminist, but it is applicable for person to tag herself as a feminist in certain cases. Let's say, if in Islam, if being a gay is actually they convicting to a sin, but we already know that being a gay is actually under gender dysphoria. It is okay for you to tag him as a gay in that state? No, right? So that is same for this kind of people. It is not okay to tag them as a feminist. You know why? Because it is going to create a perpetual cycle, because people don't really get what this feminist is all about. And if we tag them as a normal woman, or more likely we can tag them as a woman activist, even people consider that feminist is a woman activist. But what kind of woman activist they are? Like what we proposed just now, if a woman who are holding her rights in the court to get rights for her kids and also for herself, if actually she's fighting for herself, she's not fighting to tag as a feminist to being in a big role in the society, because she's upholding to her own rights. She's also upholding for her own rights and also to survive her kids, not to being a role model to other countries, because she's also suffering in certain situations. But of course, she want to tag in herself in such criteria, right? So, secondly, when she asked why we reject feminists to be a woman to tag as a feminist. Why? In our world, we believe that if we reject the name of feminist, we can create a better world to compare in the new world. Because if they just try to call a woman the scale who will stand up to empower women all increase actually. From their side, they say that if we tag, it will be increased better than this. But because they just going to connect with the society, it doesn't going to change anything. if they will just will be end up tagging themselves as a feminist, although there are some consequences or something that really matters in their house, which shows the scale that they have concluded some issues of female. But instead of tagging them in feminist, we can tag them as or call them as a woman activist, because women activist is a more, I think it's a more good manner to tag a woman, because they are fighting for themselves, not for tagging or sensualizing themselves in media or in current society. So I think this case will go for the thank you. Go for the thank you.
Oh yeah, so I thank both teams to cross the floor, shake hands, and then we'll call you on. Take your time.